All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I've got right at 6 o'clock on my computer here. So first off, I want to thank you all for taking the time this evening to join us. As we get going here, we'll be allowing other people into the room. We are also recording this webinar this evening so that the rest of our members that were unable to join us tonight would be able to benefit from having these experts with us. First off, I want to thank Ms. Dianne Westmoreland, who's the Acting State Executive Director / Administrative Officer, and then also Mr. Brett Martin, who is the Farm Program Chief for USDA FSA here in the state of Georgia. A little background as to why we have asked these two experts to join us this evening. This goes back to the CARES Act payments, specifically the what was allocated under the CFAP program that included the direct payments to livestock producers. Applications began for this program yesterday, and so we want to make sure that our members are able to ask any questions, get any additional information that they may be seeking through this. The way that we're going to conduct this evening's webinar, I'll be asking the questions directly to Ms. Westmoreland and Mr. Martin this evening, and then if time allows, we will open the floor up to questions from the audience. If you have any specific questions that you would like for them to answer in this interim time period, but maybe don't want to get on the phone or speak, feel free to enter those into the chat box. You'll see it down in the bottom middle of the window in front of you. So with that being said, thank you, Dianne and Brett, for joining us this evening. Ms. Dianne, if you don't mind, if you'll give us a little overview of the actual program, what it entails, and kind of what those funding mechanisms are for this program.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity for Brett and I to speak with you this afternoon. Basically, I'm going to ask Brett Martin to go over the program with you all, but as you said, in the CARES Act, it was approved the $16 billion to implement the coronavirus food assistance program, aka CFAP, and our agency, the Farm Service Agency, will be implementing that program. Now, there was actually $19 billion allocated through this, but $3 billion went to the Agriculture Marketing Service that will be distributing, working with contractors to distribute food to food banks or those food boxes into other nonprofit organizations. So the $16 billion was earmarked for FSA to cost share, or not cost share, but direct payments to our producers. So I can talk a little bit more later on our office structure and what you to expect when you do contact our office. But if you want to dive right into the actual program, I'm going to ask Brett Martin to jump in there and give you an overview of the program, because he's our farm program manager and our chief, and he knows way more. I know enough about the program, but he is the expert on the program as his department handles the program. So Brett.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Can y'all see me okay?
So we can.
I think I'm in. Okay. Yeah, as Dianne said, well, I'm an expert in learning, I guess you would say, because this program just started yesterday. FSA county office and state office employees were trained the end of last week. So it's been a very fast pace in trying to get this program on board. And so like I said, FSA is still learning somewhat as we go. Now, I failed to tell you, but I do have a PowerPoint if you would like for me to show that. And it's probably about 18 slides if I can share my screen. And it's just general information. There may be some more information that applies, but kind of what I could put together yesterday and today as far as a PowerPoint with the livestock information.
Sure. You've now been made the host. One thing to keep in mind as you go through here, if you'll add any participants that join us in the
Okay.
interim.
All right, I'll share my screen. Okay, does everyone see my PowerPoint?
So we do.
Okay, let me see if I can get it up. Like I said, I tried to put some information together. A lot of information was given, to us employees at the end of last week, first of this week. So, as we go through the program, things are going to come up. So there'll be, I'm going to say some clarifications on some things as we go along with the program. Of course, CFAP, as Dianne mentioned, it provides financial assistance, help offset market price declines. Let's see if I can reduce this. And increased marketing costs for due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Sign-up started yesterday, May 26th, and they go through August the 28th of 2020. And there are no late file provisions. So a producer applying for this program must have a signed application turned into an FSA county office on August the 28th of this year. And as I mentioned, you must apply through an FSA county office. And I'll talk a little bit later about how to do that under these circumstances with the way we're operating. And Dianne will probably have more to add to that as well. It's how we're having to operate due to the COVID-19 epidemic. All right, now one of the things, producer must have suffered a 5% or greater marketing loss between the average for the week of January 13th through 17th, that week of in this year, 2020, relative to the average of the week of April 6th through the 10th of 2020. And who is eligible? An eligible producer is a person, legal entity who shares in the risk of producing a crop or livestock and who is entitled to a share in the crop or livestock available for marketing or would have shared had the crop or livestock been produced in marketing. Now, a contract grower, they could be eligible even if they do not own the livestock, but it will be considered a producer if the contract allows the grower to have a risk in the livestock. Livestock owners, contract growers who are at risk and have a share of the livestock available for marketing or would have a share had the livestock been marketing or eligible livestock producers. All right, producers with livestock insurance that protects against market price declines, they're eligible, if they meet all other eligibility requirements for the program. All right, and the eligible types of livestock, of course, you have cattle, you have your feeder cattle, less than 600 pounds, those 600 pounds or more, slaughter cattle, fed cattle, slaughter cattle, mature cattle, and all other cattle. And of course, hogs, pigs, I threw this in. And lambs and yearling, I have to talk to another livestock group in the morning. So I know our focus here is for cattle though. And some definitions, of course, cattle, commercially raised, maintained bovine animals. Of course, this is excluding any beefalo, bison, or animal used for dairy production or intended for dairy production. And feeder cattle, 600 pounds or more means cattle weighing more than 600 pounds. But less than the slaughter cattle fed cattle as defined. Feeder cattle less than 600 pounds means cattle weighing less than 600 pounds. And the slaughter cattle, fed cattle means cattle with an average weight of 1,400 pounds with a yield average carcass weight of 800 pounds. They're intended for slaughter. And then slaughter cattle, mature cattle, means cold cattle raised or maintained for breeding purposes. However, they're removed from the inventory and are intended for slaughter. And carry on with the definitions. All other cattle means commercially raised or maintained bovine animals not meeting the definitions I just went over with, or of another category in this rule, excluding beefalo, bison, and dairy animals. And then cattle raised or maintained for breeding purposes if the animal is commercially raised and maintained for use as either a sow or dam. And then the eligible livestock definitions, one more page of them. Of course, I'm going to skip down and talk about what unpriced is, because you'll see this definition a lot. A commodity or livestock that's unpriced or subject to price risk means it's not subject to agreed upon price in the future through a forward contract agreement or similar binding agreement as of January 15th of this year, 2020. All right. What's the eligible livestock? Of course, I went over there a little bit about the definitions, but livestock owned on January 15th of this year and sold between January 15th and April 15th of this year. Any offspring born from January 15th through April 15th. Livestock in inventory owned between April 16th and May 14th, and livestock that are no longer used for dairy production, has entered into the beef cattle market. And then all sales and inventory are subject to the price risk, and that was the January 15th date you're looking at. Ineligible livestock used for dairy production, livestock purchased after January 15th and sold on or before April 15th, livestock subject to an agreed upon price in the future, like it's a locked in price through a forward contract agreement or similar binding document as of January 15th of this year. And when someone's applying for the CFAP program, producer reporting requirements, now this is for livestock. Of course, all commodities is going to be a self-certification by the producer or representative of the entity or operation. And what I mean by self-certification, there's no requirements for any records up front while you're applying. It's all self-certification, so you're going to fill out all that information that pertains to your operation on the application. You don't have to have any records up front, but you will be required to keep those records, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. All right, you're looking at your sales and inventory information that's required. All right, it's any owned inventory as of January 15th, 2020, and any offspring for that inventory that's subject to the price risk sold between January 15th and April 15th. And then also the highest owned inventory subject to price risk from April 16th through May 14th. And producer reporting requirements for livestock operations that have multiple eligible producers of livestock sales and inventory. Producers must ensure that this self-certification is for their individual share of the eligible livestock in the operation. And then it's the producer's responsibility to certify only the sales and inventory that are subject to price risk. Of course, now our local county offices, they're not required to review any contracts or agreements or any other type documentation during the application process. Now, each office has a county office committee that oversees the office. If the county office committee is reviewing applications and determine whether numbers submitted are reasonable or not, now they may ask for copies of documentation, but as a standard rule, it's not required up front. And some sources of livestock production records, you could use breeding records where you could obtain your information from, breeding records, feeding, inventory records, rendering receipts, any sales receipts, veterinarian records, or any other type records that would show livestock numbers. And do caution that any records you use for certifying for the program maintained for at least 3 years, because they're subject to be spot checked. Like I said, no records up front, but there will be a percentage of the applications that will be selected and spot checked for accuracy. And payment information, there's actually two parts to the payment. Part one is the CARES Act, and that payment will be based on actual sales of owned inventory sold between January 15th and April 15th. And then it's multiplied by a national payment rate per head. And part 2 is Commodity Credit Corporation CCC funds, and that's based on the highest inventory. You'll pick a day of what your highest inventory is between April 16th and May 14th, and that would be multiplied by another national payment rate. And there's 2 different fund codes. There's the CARES Act, CCC. It's a little bit confusing, but in the end, it's all going to be meshed together as one payment. And for livestock producers, they can, depending on your eligibility, you can be eligible to participate in one of these payment categories, or you can participate in both. It depends on your eligibility. Now, the initial payment that will be made is 80% of the total payment, and then later on, the 20% will be paid if funds are remaining for the program. And then here's a chart, basically what I just said, talking about the payment calculations. And if you'll look at that note on part 1 under the CARES Act, it says livestock must have been owned by the producer on January 15th, 2020, and then any offspring born before April 15th, 2020 from the same inventory are eligible. And that's the sales part. Of course, part 2 is looking at your inventory. And payment rates, that's what the rates are for cattle for the different categories. You see the CARES Act part 1, and then the CCC funds part 2. And then there are payment limitations to the program. There's a $250,000 total payment limitation per person or legal entity. Now, in this program, this is the first for FSA. We've never done this before, but there is an optional increase for corporations, limited liability companies, and limited partnerships. They may seek an increase of another $250,000. Of course, that's based on a member or stockholder or partner that contributes at least 400 hours of active personal labor or management, or a combination of both. And actually, you can go up to a maximum payment of $750,000. So that means you get your initial $250,000 payment. You have a member that contributes, up to $400 hours of these. That would be another $250,000. So you're up to $500,000. If another member meets those requirements as well, then you could get another $250,000 for a maximum of $750,000 for either the corporation, limited liability company, or limited partnership. And filing an application with the county office. Of course, as I mentioned, with the COVID-19 situation, our county offices, they're not closed. However, visitors are not permitted at this time. So, contact your local county office. They're doing telephone appointments. Applications must be submitted through a county office. Talk to your local county office, see if there's some way you can drop it off. Some of our offices have created drop boxes. Of course, we can't come into like physical contact with our customers. We have to maintain that social distancing. So, but if they have a drop box, you could drop it off. Of course, you can email it. We do accept faxes and also regular mail. And if you're new to FSA, there may be some additional general eligibility forms that you must complete. Also, this program is subject to our adjusted gross income provisions. If you have not submitted a adjusted gross income form for this year, 2020, then you need to complete a new one of those forms for the year. So as far as program information, departmental website is farmers.gov, and they actually have a CFAP page. So if you go to farmers.gov/CFAP, there's all kind of information about the program on there. There is a downloadable application that you can, I believe you can fill it out online and then print it out at home if you want to do that and take it to the county office. There's also a payment calculator that you can input numbers for your operation and, sort of get an idea of what your payment will be. And then also there's fact sheets and just a lot of additional information, not just livestock, but all about the CFAP program. So, and that was a quick overview of the program. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
And if you'll
Okay. You
look
back
on-
in control?
not yet. Let's see here. Do this. All right. Looks like we are back. So, Mr. Martin, thank you so much for that overview. That was a very comprehensive look at this item. However, I just want to run through a couple of questions that we're getting here in the office and some of our leadership is getting right now. You mentioned that producers might be able to benefit from both sides, from the CFAP funding bucket and or the CCC funding bucket. Are those payments stacked or are they separate based off of the CFAP focusing solely on what was sold during that time frame?
Yeah. Well, if you have sales during that time frame that are eligible, it will pay you on part one. And then also if you still have inventory between April 16th and May 14th, then you can receive a payment there. But, it's two different fund codes, but if you are eligible for both, it's going to be meshed into one payment.
So if, just as an example, if let's say I had 100 head on January 15th, I didn't sell because I expected the market to go back up and wound up selling those cattle, say April 25th, I would only be eligible for the highest inventory just prior to selling those cattle on April 24th, correct?
Yes, during those time periods.
And for
between
that,
April 16th through May 14th, whatever your highest inventory, and then that's what you'd be eligible for.
okay. So it wouldn't have anything to do with the cattle that I owned prior to April 15th, as long as I didn't sell them.
Yeah, as long. Yeah.
Okay. Secondly, you mentioned, which types of cattle. There's obviously lots of different elements, and I'm actually going to, I'm going to share the table right now on the screen just so everybody's got it in front of them. Let me know if you can see that.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So what types of cattle will qualify where, and what are the definitions that FSA is using to review these? For example, what specifically, one of the questions we're being asked about is dairy crossed cattle that are no longer going to be used for milking purposes or never would be used for milking purposes, specifically dairy steers and or dairy cull cows. Where do dairy steers fall in this table? If they're dairy crossed steers.
They would just fall under whatever weight category they're in.
Okay. So they would
try and. I mean, it just talks about under eligible cattle is, let's see, livestock no longer used for dairy production and entered into the beef market. I'm assuming that it would fall under what depends on what weight range they're in.
Okay. And then if any producers have any dairy cull cows, they would fall in the slaughtered mature cattle.
Yes, if they're taken out of production.
Okay. Awesome. Next question. We and maybe Ms. Westmoreland, you can help answer this one. If our producers run into any issues as far as trying to complete their applications and/or to where the county offices may not have all of the information or what's been presented here tonight, what do producers need to do in order to help move that process along?
Well, I've been receiving reports where if the producer contacts the county office, that the county office can just process their application while they're on the phone. They'll complete it, and then they will email it to the producer. We've been creative. We have some county offices that are meeting producers, of course, keeping the social distancing, but meeting producers in the parking lot to obtain signatures or to exchange papers. So that website that Brett mentioned, the farmers.gov, it provides good information. It provides an application, but if they'll just call the county office is willing to help them complete their application as they speak, or take down their number and they'll call them back.
Okay. You mentioned several ways that producers are going to be, or several ways that producers could provide the inventory numbers based off of what they had on April 16th. Is there any preferred method to that? I know you listed veterinarian records, breeding records, rendering records, any of those. Is there a preferred method of those documents, or is it whatever the producer happens to use on their operation?
Yeah, I mean, it's whatever the producer happens to use, as long as they can, provide accurate records for their application.
Okay.
But now, Brett, hold on just a second. Is that only because we're self-certifying at this point? So is that only if the county committee determines that they wish to review the records at this point?
Well, yeah. I mean, what I talked about, the sources of livestock production evidence. Those
Right.
are some types of records if the county committee is looking at an application to determine whether it's reasonable or not, that they may ask for. And, like I said, there'll be a percentage of applications selected for spot checks. It may be a year or so from now, but at some point. So, those are some types of records that you can show livestock production evidence. And of course, it does include other records. If you've had something, I would say kind of a verifiable records that could be checked with the sale barn or somebody like that, that would verify that you did have that number of head of cattle or sold that number of head of cattle.
And at this point, if they call the county office, all they're going to do is take their self-certified application at this point.
Right at this point.
Another question that has come up is on the back end payments. You mentioned that the first payment is going to be 80% of the value of what the producer qualifies for. The second 20%, that is subject to a pro rata payment based off of the remaining amount of funds that are left in the program, correct?
Yes, it depends on the amount of funds that are left after making the initial 80% payment.
Okay, so for example, and for our producers on here, if let's assume that a producer would qualify for $100,000 in value in payments through the program, they would receive the initial check of $80,000, and then the remaining $20,000 would be subject to what is remaining in the program after the application period is closed, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had anything as far as prorating it. Just only information that we have now is that at a later date, if the funding is available, then the 20% will be made.
Okay. We've got a question from the audience here. How would you calculate a cow-calf pair that was sold on March 13th of 2020?
Let's see. So let me get my notes. Like I said,
Yeah,
I'm still having to
I was gonna say,
spend,
it was amazing with the speed that
right,
USDA put this program together, and especially one that would capture so many different variables. In fact, this program not only includes payments to livestock producers, but also to specialty crop farmers, as well as those producers that supply the farmers markets. So that's why the dates are at the significant range that they're in, is to help pick up all the other commodity types.
yeah, well, are they selling the, well, cow-calf pair, I don't know how it's going to be done. Of course, like the mother cow, it depends on the size. And is the calf also going to be sold as a feeder cattle?
So I will tell you, in the example that was listed, essentially looking at a cow-calf pair that was sold during that time frame during the first CFAP funding payment portion. In the conversations that our office has had with Undersecretary Northey, his comment was every animal, whether it's a 1-day-old calf or a 10-year-old cow, would receive the benefit from the program. So I would take that to mean that the calf is going to fall in the bucket of the less than 600 pounds. The
Right.
calf
Yeah.
is going to fall in probably the all other cattle method, because she may or may not be headed to slaughter.
Right.
And therefore would give us the, obviously with the March 13th date, that would fall in the CARES Act payment one. So the calf would be eligible for $102. The cow would be eligible for $102 for a total of $204. That's the way that I'm reading through the tea leaves.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm incorrect on that.
Well, that's what I'd assume it'd be right now.
Okay. All right. We have another question from the audience. If a producer has cattle in a feedlot between April 16th and May 14th period, are these cattle eligible to be included in the highest inventory category? And I would assume by that question that the producer still maintains the ownership of those cattle within the feedlot at that time.
And there's no agreed upon price or anything
Unfortunately,
before January 15th.
Let's assume that there's not before April 15th. Because it's my understanding that the program is focusing solely on when the price date is set.
Right.
So
right.
if the let's take for example the same example here. Those cattle in the feedlot were in the feedlot obviously before April 16th. So let's assume that they put them in the feedlot and it's established a contract price on March 15th when they went into the feedlot. They would be eligible under the first bucket, correct? Under the payments.
What I know now, I'd say so. Yeah.
But only if okay.
Long as, and I'm going to say this, I'm not definitely sure, but just based on the basic information we have, as long as they maintain ownership and there was no locked in price before January 15th.
They would qualify under the inventory side.
Yes, I'd say so if they're still maintaining ownership.
Okay.
And then when are they planning on selling those cattle? Because you have to have them in your inventory between April 16th and May 14th.
Right. If they're being shown in the inventory, even if they're not being sold until after that May 5th, the May 14th deadline.
Right. Yeah.
They would still fall under that payment rate of $33 a head.
Okay. So some of these, I'll try to answer best I can, but some of these I may have to get back in touch with you.
Sure.
For some clarification on these.
Okay, and what we can do is we can provide written explanations to it. I'm taking a note of all of these questions that are being asked, just so we have a record of them.
Yeah, and if you can supply me with a list of questions, if you have them, and then
Sure.
I'll certainly be glad to look in it further.
Okay. Let's look at, we have another question from the audience. Can you define highest inventory? Is this just steers and heifers? Is this just steers and heifers I would have sold during this time, but didn't sell because of pricing? Or is this all animals on my farm, including bulls?
All animals that you owned as January 15th.
Okay.
You know, like in that date range of, was it April 16th through May 14th? Pick the day that you have the highest number of head in your inventory, and that's what you would use.
All right. That brings up another question, specifically bulls. Are bulls, I'm assuming, falling into that all other cattle category?
Yeah, I would think bulls would fall into that category.
All right. One other question, and this has come up recently. USDA usually requires an age range on, or an age component to these contracts, or at least these payment programs. With this program, is there an age specific request as part of that? Meaning, if you are a minor and you own cattle and you sold cattle during that same time frame, are the minors eligible for payments?
I'm not really certain at this point. There are some what we call payment eligibility and limitation provisions. I do know foreign person applies. I'm not sure without researching about minors if they are eligible or not. Most of our programs minors can be, but I would have to verify that with the CFAP program.
All right, at this time, let's open up the floor. I'm going to unmute everyone. Oh, there we go. Here's another question from the audience. Will these payments be subject to income tax?
I would say so. Most ours are. You get a 1099 at the end of the year.
Okay. All right. At this time, we'll open up questions from the floor. We're going to go through this for about 8 minutes here. Try and wrap this up at about 6:45, if that works for everyone. At this time, if you have a question, feel free to ask at this time.
This is Drew Chestnut. What about, I sold 5 steers on April the 29th, and they were all under 600 pounds. How does that fall into the program?
Well, the sales dates have to be, well, I mean, if you had them, possibly they could qualify under inventory if you include them in your highest number of inventory after April 16th.
So the actual cutoff on highest inventory, or now what is the cutoff on the sale date? I missed that in the PowerPoint.
It's April 15th. You're looking at sales, yes, sir, between January 15th and April 15th.
Okay.
And then you're looking at your highest number of head in inventory from April 16th through May 14th.
Okay, thank you. That explains it.
Okay.
All right. Are there any other questions? All right.
Can you hear me? This is Kathy Jenkins.
Yes, ma'am, we can.
How do we show the 5%? How do we show eligibility?
Well, if you had any sales during that time, sales or inventory, that's what it's looking at. Cattle that you've owned as of January 15th of this year.
We did sell 2 separate groups of cattle, and I mean, I know we didn't get what we thought was enough money for them, but how do
Right.
isn't it like 5%?
Yes, a 5% market loss.
So how do we show a 5% market loss? Do we just assume that since we got such a bad price that it is that? Or, I mean, how do we show that eligibility? What are those requirements?
Yeah, if you had sales during that time period between January 15th and April 15th.
That we're eligible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I didn't know if there was a way we just needed to prove eligibility or not. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
I will mention, of course, sign up just started yesterday. And so we had 2 days of sign up, and Georgia's already had about 560 applications submitted throughout the state, and 420 of those are for livestock. So livestock producers have done an excellent job contacting their county office and starting the sign up process.
All right, we've got time for about one more.
And I would encourage all of our farmers to go ahead and contact their county office and start the process.
All right. Well, folks, with that being the case, not hearing any more questions or seeing any more pop up in the chat box, we'll conclude tonight's webinar. We greatly appreciate our relationship that we have with the Farm Service Agency, especially Ms. Westmoreland and Mr. Martin, for making time tonight on schedule. We know that they are slammed right now, and so please be patient with them as they work through this. Again, this is a program that has moved at light speed and in a way that has never been done before through FSA. But we are confident that they will be able to address any concerns that anyone has. Please know that if you have any specific questions, you can always feel free to call Georgia Cattlemen's. We'll be able to route those questions to the right and appropriate people. If you experience any issues at your county office, please let GCA know so that we can also pass that up the chain. The questions that were asked tonight that we were able to capture from the chat will be presented and allowed for a written response in the week to come. So with that being said, unless there's any other questions or comments, we will conclude tonight's webinar. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And again, thank you to FSA for making the time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.